I have been IC student in 2013, and I was majoring in social psychology. I have background in bachelor's degree in business administration, and then I obtained my first master degree in applied social psychology. So that's why I decided somehow to pursue my international studies at University of Helsinki, and also like in the same area where I already had my first master degree. So social psychology is kind of the area where I specialize. Somehow I also I cannot say that this is a field like my field of studies actually is 100% related to what I'm doing right now at IOM, but it like the theoretical studies and a theoretical perspective, of course, gave me a lot to improve my as a professional. So my professional career started at IOM. So I have been working for IOM for 7 years. I cannot believe like when I'm saying this, because I'm kind of a person who is always on the move and who always tries like new things and who wants like to change a job. So I just don't know how I just how I ended up to work for one and the same organization for 7 years. But I must say that it was those years was very much interesting, and it was always like I was seeking like novelty, and I was always part of different project teams. So that's why I somehow, that is kind of justification why I ended up to work one and the same organization for the 7 years, because my job was not like boring for me, as it is a case for many people that they want to change job because it's kind of because it's boring, and they also want to kind of refresh their professional career. So within IOM, as I said, I've been part of different project teams, and this organization, as I said earlier, it's mainly humanitarian organization, and it's mandated to provide some support services to migrants. But of course, as IOM has a lot of missions worldwide, it's more than 150 missions, like across the globe and worldwide. Like of course, there are like different services and different tasks that IOM missions operate. For example, today I will speak from IOM Georgia's perspective, but of course I will try to relate to the topic, which is why we are here. I'll like for the few slides, I don't have many slides, so I won't take much time of you, but I just want to talk about the situation, which Alexandra also like very nicely presented to us from one perspective, but I want to give you some kind of country perspective, because I'm now based in Georgia, Tbilisi, capital of Georgia. So and it's neighboring Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. And we also see this high numbers of incoming Ukrainians to Georgia, because let's go back to the to give you some historical perspective. Ukraine has been always and is Georgia's friend, let's say, on a political landscape. It has been always three countries, Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, who are aspiring to become a member of European Union. And as you know, quite like recent happenings on a political environment is that Moldova and Ukraine gained a status of candidate country to join European Union in a near future. But Georgia was given like 1 year to revisit their reforms and to improve their political and social and economic life. So that's kind of current position of Georgia. Also, there has been always historical ties, also like cultural, geographical, and political proximity between Georgia and Ukraine for years. So when the war started on 24th of February, there was we saw like I'm a kind of general layperson, and when I was walking in the street, I also witnessed incoming Ukrainian refugees in Georgia. Not that many, of course, comparing to Romania, Moldova, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, but we saw that kind of trend. But as you see on the slide, like the figures, it's very interesting because you see that there are like more people leaving Georgia than comparing to people who stay and remain in Georgia. There is an explanation and logic behind the figures, because it was kind of first shock for the people when the war started. So it was kind of Georgia was like kind of easy first stop country for them. So like, for example, in order to move from Ukraine to like more to European Union and some Central European countries, you need some kind of time, and also probably you don't know anyone. And between Georgia and Ukraine, there was always like kind of social ties, and there was already established social network in Georgia. So people like just decided, to come to Georgia, but they did not stay here. This is the thing. They moved to European member states because they offer more like social benefits, and there is like this temporary protection directive, which is activated by the European Union member states, and they offer Ukrainian refugees some accommodation and like some social benefits. But in order like this information to get to the Ukrainian refugees, they needed probably time. So they came to Georgia because, as I said, it was kind of easy first stop, and because they had one friend or two friends, and it was easier to migrate to Georgia rather than directly go to Germany or to other countries. As we said, and you were interested in some statistics. There are basically like few countries who are like major countries who are receiving Ukrainian refugees, and you hear all those countries probably every day in a TV. It's Poland, Moldova, Romania, Slovakia, and Hungary. But those countries were like kind of first countries who actually were hit by Ukrainian refugees, especially Moldova, especially Romania, and of course Poland. So those countries were received like majority of Ukrainian refugees, and they still receive and accommodate and provide some support services to them to the refugees. It's also like interesting that like when a few months after the war has started, then for example, the United States and Canada, they offered some resettlement programs to the refugees. So then there was like flows from European countries, and still there is a flow from European countries to United States and to Canada, because they offer as I said, protection services, and it has like more benefits for the refugees. But it was after a few months when the war started. As you see also like from this slide, like gender of Ukrainians, it's kind of majority are male, and there's not like big difference between the percentages. And as you know, like mainly Ukrainian refugees are consisted by women, children, and elderly person, because men from 18 to 16 are not allowed to leave the country because they are protecting, and they are soldiers, and they are protecting their country. And also, as you see from this slide about the asylum applications, it's very small number, and it's also it has some explanation, because well, they are already like by the wide by the European Union, and majority of countries, they are already acknowledged as Ukrainian refugees, so they don't need to lodge an asylum application. So that's why the numbers are very very small, and also like because there is no like it's kind of pointless. There is no idea to lodge an asylum application, because they are already acknowledged as Ukrainian refugees. They already have this status, and they when they are in Georgia, they received some kind of assistance. While comparing to some other European countries, of course, this support scheme is very small, and mainly they received a very small cash assistance, and like of course temporary accommodation, which lasts for a few months. And that's it. But this few months, it helps people to somehow to have an idea where they want to reestablish, and they find ways to move to move to European countries like Germany, for example, and Italy. I was like checking the statistics, and I saw that Poland has 1.3 million Ukrainian refugees. Germany received 1 million, Italy, and then Russia. So those are like 4 countries who are accommodating Ukrainian refugees. Very interesting. What we witness here in Georgia is incoming citizens of Russia through the land border and through airports, because as you know, the current happenings, so there was like very large flow of citizens of Russia to enter to Georgia because of few reasons. There is a geographical proximity. There are like social, cultural, and historical ties between Russia and Georgia. And the third is that there is a very liberal visa policy, which basically means that citizens of Russia can stay and live and work in Georgia without visa for 1 year. So Georgia, in general, in a nutshell, Georgia has a very liberal visa policy, which basically means that more than 30 countries can enter to Georgia and live and work without visa for 1 year. So it's like very simplified, very liberal, like I would say like too liberal system, which enables people to come to Georgia and there is no requirement as such to register somewhere, for example, at the city hall or in a specialized institution. So there is no like this bureaucratical burden for the incoming migrants. So that's why like Georgia is becoming very much attractive to let's say digital nomads. This is kind of a new term that I somehow learned a few weeks ago. I was talking to one person who was having holiday in Georgia, and she called herself as being a digital nomad in Georgia. So which basically means, well, to explain, and you probably know what is the definition behind this term, but those are a population, very mobile population who are like geographically independent people, so they can move from one country to another back and forth, and they can live and stay for indefinite time, and they are basically working remotely. And they have like sufficient income and so on and so forth. As you talked, like it's the same with the citizens of Russia. So we also like see the trend. Well, it's not a trend, but it's kind of my observation. And also you mentioned this aspect earlier, that this is a people of like upper class and middle class, very young population who are very mobile and who have like remote jobs and who have like very sufficient income and means to sustain their lives. So these are this kind of people who enter and live to Georgia. And even if you will just go and walk in the streets of Tbilisi, you will just see very young population. It's not families with kids and so on and so forth, but those are like very young population. Which we cannot say is the same with Ukrainian refugees, which is like totally different situation. Also, like quite recently, we also, as an IOM, like just to share some perspectives about what IOM does in Georgia to assist Ukrainian refugees. Basically, it is like twofold assistance. One is we decided to kind of establish some platform to counsel Ukrainian refugees when they entered to Georgia and they were lost and they were like needed some basic information about how to get social assistance, where and how to be accommodated in the hotel or through Airbnb, or about schooling opportunities, about job market, and so on and so forth. So we received such inquiries and we tried to deliver all needed information. And not only IOM, because there are some other AIDS organizations, like, of course, there are other UN agencies and other AIDS organizations who kind of go with coordinated efforts. They try to deliver very targeted assistance to Ukrainian refugees. So it's one type of one direction, and the second is now IOM is setting up a project to help Ukrainian refugees to resettle from Moldova through Georgia to other European countries. So it's kind of like very coordinated movement from Moldova through Georgia to other receiving host European member state country. So this is a project which is in a pipeline and it would be coming in few months to have this very coordinated and organized way of organized movement of Ukrainian refugees to receiving EU member state countries. And also what we noticed when we were counseling the Ukrainian refugees through email or phone calls, we saw that after a few months when the war started, there were like few inquiries that people wanted to return to their country, because it was the first shock, and everybody, like not everybody, but the majority left the country. But then they realized that this war won't stop in a few months, so it will be extending in a much longer period. So there was like this second shock that they wanted to go back to their country, and recently I read an article, and it was like this kind of tendency was nicely framed as pendular returns, which basically means the population is moving back and forth. So there are like temporary returns. They go back to Ukraine, then they again go back to to other countries. So this kind of trend will be sustained because of various reasons. Well, they have some families left behind in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. But they also want to somehow start a new life, and to have an income and so on and so forth in another country, because it's very difficult to do it in Ukraine, considering the current situation. As I said earlier, like for the Ukrainian refugees, Georgia is a first stop country, but it's not that much attractive because the country is very small, and Georgia struggles with economically, politically in all areas. So Ukrainian refugees face the same type of challenges, even more as the local population. It's economic hardship, it's of course mental health problems, like delivering some physical health services, and of course, like Georgia lacks capacity to integrate Ukrainian refugees. That's why they decide to move like to other countries. And also, like when we were answering the inquiries coming from Ukrainian refugees, there was also a lot of questions about resettlement programs to US and Canada, because IOM operates this program in IOM Ukraine. So basically what it means is that they just lodge an application, and they request to be resettled to either US or Canada. And well, when the application is approved, they have the green light to go to this country. That's basically it. Another aspect which I want to highlight here is trafficking in human beings, because because of the war and like the chaotic situation everywhere, especially as a land border in Moldova and Poland. There has been kind of very poor coordination between AIDS organizations. There have been a lot of volunteers taking refugees to their homes. So it kind of, and we all know that war feeds this crime, like trafficking in human beings. So like IOM, together with other organizations, started to deliver some flyers just to for the Ukrainian refugees to be aware of at least to be aware of the strange people who might offer help. Well, it could be like genuinely, I'm not saying anything else, but it's good to know and to be aware of the risks of trafficking in human beings at the border. Especially when there is, like, as I said, chaos at the borders and poor coordination and very not registering incoming refugees, because there is still a huge flow of refugees at the border in Moldova and in Poland. And as I said, the second issue why trafficking in human beings as a topic is becoming salient is that, as I said, Ukrainian refugees are mainly men, are women, children, and elderly person. So those three categories are very vulnerable categories, and very vulnerable for the traffickers and for the smugglers. Could be also like unaccompanied minors, children from foster care family, children from orphanages where they lived before the war. So this is like very vulnerable population, and that's why IOM and together with other organizations somehow try to highlight this topic, and just to make for the people to be aware of traffickers and smugglers at the border. Yes. Oh, there is nothing. It's not a it's quick video, but nothing else. Yeah, and this is kind of the tweet which I saw, and it was basically about the British families who welcome Ukrainian refugees into their homes, which is like very genuinely very kind deed. But it's also very important that aid organizations should actually register who is taking where, and just to be like coordinated effort, and not kind of chaotic distribution of well, let's say help to the refugees. Yeah, this is all what I wanted to highlight. And just one note, well, this is information like my email address, and generally IOM Georgia's webpage, 2 web pages that operates currently. You can, of course, if you have any inquiries not related to this topic, but in general, I would be happy to give some advices or recommendations, whatever I can do. Going back to the topic, which is the effects of Ukrainian war on the professional lives and experiences of UH alumni. I would say just quite recently, well, the war is, and the crisis is, of course, has detrimental effects on everyone, basically, on the entire planet. But it also like gives and opens up a lot of opportunities. Now, if we speak about like career-wise, let's say, because we see, for example, speaking on from IOM perspective, we saw, for example, missions who were very small and having like 30 or 40 staff becoming like 200 and 300 missions with 300 and 400 staff. For example, IOM Moldova, which was like very small mission, having 40 staff members in the country. When the war started, the mission itself, they became very large, and now currently I think they have like 200, maybe more staff, which basically means that the mission has enlarged, and including Poland. Poland was a very small mission, IOM like something like 20%, and now it is like huge mission. I'm giving you these figures because it gives it enlarges the opportunity. So there is a great demand on human resources. There is great demand on people who have experience in project management, or some case management, and delivering assistance and services to the refugees, and of course the language, which is a priority. Well, everywhere in every job vacancy note, you see that they want at least Ukrainian, Russian, just to speak on those languages in order to communicate to them. Well, as I said, the war is, of course, like it is a very negative thing that is going on nowadays, and that we see those pictures and images in TV. But it also gives some kind of volunteering opportunities, and if we dig like deeper, we will definitely see these free spots where we can meaningfully contribute. So thank you again for listening, and I'm very happy. Should you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer. Thank you.